The old farmhouse was almost completely empty up on Lookout Mountain. Most of my belongings were either in storage or had been given to friends or sold to strangers. In the front room, in the corner, were a handful of things still stacked, waiting for boxes and bags to be loaded into my truck for the 3,700-mile drive. The one remaining piece of furniture waiting for my friend Emily to pick up was my old writing desk. On it sat two belongings. The first was my old stainless coffee cup, teacup. The other was a single 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Now that teacup was dented and scratched. The handle was missing from years of abuse. It had been to the top of the Grand Teton, to the bottom of the Grand Canyon with me. It was by my side when I was stared down by a mountain lion in Hell's Gate Wilderness in Arizona. It was in the bottom of the canoe the first time I heard wolves howl in the Boundary Waters. Everywhere I go, that teacup goes with me. Now the piece of paper, it was torn, creased, crumpled, and reflattened. It was one of those sheets you can buy at any office store with the pre-printed border around it, real frilly, so that you can create your own certificates. I remember when I got that certificate. It read something along the lines of, "For your dedicated service, the Chattanooga chapter of the National Audubon Society is naming you the volunteer most likely to be eaten by a bear." Yep. I remember getting that award and first looking around the room at all the other volunteers and thinking, yeah, they got it right. And then thinking, I hope this isn't a prophecy. Well, when everything was packed and loaded in the truck, the cup went in the center console cup holder, and the certificate was folded and placed in the file that I kept in the passenger seat that had insurance papers and whatnot that I would need for crossing the international borders. A few weeks later, I was in Juneau. I took that certificate and I tacked it on the wall over the desk in my new room. I wanted it to remind me of two things. One was the reason that I went to Juneau to begin with, the reason I went to Alaska. The sheer wildness of it, but more specifically, to see and to photograph bears. I also wanted it to remind me of the inherent dangers that come along with getting close enough to bears to photograph them looking into their eyes. Well, all set up, I set about doing just that, and very soon, I was backpacking along a trail with Cowie Meadow to my right, the woods and the ridges to my left, 3.5 miles out to Berners Bay. Berners Bay is a spectacular place. That time of year, early summer, tall grasses line the edge of the ocean there, and across the still bay you can see Lion's Head Mountain rising precipitously from the water. Beyond that, Lynn Canal, the deepest fjord in North America. And on the horizon, the Chilkat Mountain Range. Looked like the lower jaw of a crocodile, the jagged teeth sawing their way through the sky. I set my camp up in the tall grass there because through that grass were freshly beaten down paths where bears had been wandering through. Dotted along the path were piles of bear scat. And just a few feet away in the sand at the edge of the intertidal zone were fresh bear tracks. Setting my camp up there was probably my first mistake. But the camp was simple. It was a couple of trekking poles stuck in the ground with a small tarp stretched over them and staked out. I hung my food about 100 yards away in the top of a tree, put on my hip pack with my bear spray stuck in the pocket, camera around my neck, and went out looking for bears. I spent the day wandering through the forest, along the shore, up the creek. Never saw any bears. In fact, never saw more bear sign than was right there in my camp. And eventually, late that evening, I found myself back there having supper. Now, this time of year, the days are long in Alaska. And the sun doesn't so much set as it just sort of floats along the peaks of the mountains. And I was watching that sun as I had my supper, and then I hung my food, made a cup of tea, and decided to go out and sit on one of the rocks in the intertidal zone to enjoy that 3 or 4 hour sunset. It would be nearly midnight before it got dark. So I walked out, set up my tripod, fastened the camera, and trained my lens on one of the more interesting peaks to wait for the sun to drift through my frame. Sat down and began sipping my tea. That's when I saw the movement out of the corner of my eye. 2 brown bears came out of the woods about 200 yards away. One of them was ginormous, broad, thick, with a muscular hump between her shoulders that had more power than all the muscles in my body combined. Behind her, a much smaller, leaner bear. Now, when I say small and lean, that's small and lean for a brown bear. Still huge. Still has a paw larger than my face. This was clearly a sow and a second-year cub, meaning that cub's about 1.5 years old, making it a teenager, coming of age, finding his way in the world. Those bears came out, and I did what I always do in that situation. I stood up and I said, "Hey bears, I'm over here." They need to know where you are. I said, I'm just going to drink my tea and take some pictures of you. Don't you never mind. The mama, the big sow, she raised her head up from the grass she was grazing and just sort of nodded as if to say, "Yep, all good." But the young guy, he kept eating grass, but he kept walking towards me as he did. I trained the camera on him and took pictures as he got closer and closer and closer, till finally he was 40 yards away where there was a large flat boulder. He stood next to that boulder facing me, spread his legs out as wide as he could, and rocked back and forth, flexing his muscles. This is the age in a brown bear where they're figuring out where they are, where they stand in the hierarchy. You see, bear's life is all about one thing. It's about dominance. It's about understanding your place. He didn't know his place with me, so he was posturing. So I took pictures of him. When he was done flexing facing me, he turned sideways, stepped on top of the rock. Once again, spreading his legs out, rocking back and forth. I could see that massive flank and the muscles rippling beneath that thick fur. I could see the 2 to 3 inch claws on the ends of his paws extending out over the rock. Then he stepped off the rock towards me. And I decided enough. "Get on back to your mama!" I yelled. And he obeyed. He turned and trotted back to his mama, and I caught my breath. I decided at this moment that perhaps I should get out my bear spray, just in case he decided to come back. So I reached around to my hip pack, which I had left in the camp about 500 yards away. I looked out to see mom and bear cub on the edge of the woods, right around 100 yards away from me. They were now walking from right to left, grazing as they went, following the tree line. I decided, since they were no longer paying attention to me, this would be a good time to go get my bear spray. So I turned to my left and began to walk. That was probably my second mistake. The young brown bear, seeing me walking parallel to him, saw that as a threat. And in an instant, he turned and was galloping full speed straight towards me. Now, as many times as I had thought about how this could happen, I'd never scripted that moment. I never decided what I should say, and perhaps even if I had, I would have forgotten in that moment. But I yelled at the top of my lungs, "This is not the way we're going to do this!" I know. Then again, I suspect I could just as easily have yelled, "One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish." I don't think the words really mattered. What did matter was that in the time it took me to say those few short words, he had covered the distance and was less than 20 yards from me. slammed on his brakes. I yelled so loud that I saw his mama back behind him jump. He spun around, ran back to her, and they both went into the woods. Now, it probably wasn't even my yelling that did it. Well, it might be what sent them into the woods, but the charge was probably a bluff. Again, he's trying to find out, am I going to stand my ground? Am I going to run? If I'd run, he would have chased. So I did the right thing. Now that they were in the woods, I turned and went on to the camp to get my bear spray. I found the spray and I stood up and looked back over in the direction where the bears were. And of course, they were no longer there, but the wood line makes about a 90-degree angle there going away from where I had been. And I saw them come back out of the woods now, back into the tall grass. Mom was once again grazing. Cub was once again walking straight towards me. I decided at that moment that I would take down my camp. I wouldn't stay there for the night. I was aware of my first mistake. So I began breaking down the camp, but I couldn't just pack it all up at once, because once I knelt down to pull out a tent stake or to stuff something in my backpack, I could no longer see the bear. And when I stood up, he would be that much closer walking towards me. So I would pack a couple of things, stand up and say, "Get back to your mama." Pack a couple of things, stand up, "Get back to your mama." And every time he'd take a few steps back, but then by the time I looked again, he would be advancing. So it took a while. But eventually I got my pack all together, everything in it, and I ran over to the tree and lowered my food down, stuffed that in. Came back, and the bear was maybe 100 yards away. But he was standing right close to the trail that I'd come in on. And it was going to be difficult to go back out the same way. So I started planning for which way to go when I realized I didn't have my teacup. I'd left it back there on a boulder where the bear charged me. I wasn't leaving without my favorite teacup. How many mistakes did I make at this point? I've lost track. Where were we? Some people might say this was a third. Bruce Pfitzer wouldn't, though. He would agree that I should go back and get my teacup. Where's Bruce? It's what you would have done, right? The only time I've ever taken the safety off bear spray in the woods, in the wild, I pulled off the safety and I held that bear spray in front of me as I walked back to my cup, talking to the bear the whole time. "Stay back there with your mama. Stay back with your mama." I got my cup. Now I'm standing right by the edge of that trail that's going to take me right past him. He's maybe 30, 40 yards off. And I said, well, he's already come closer to me than that. I'm taking the trail. I'm going to show him who's dominant. Yes, that probably was a third mistake. Y'all are listening too close. So I held out that bear spray at arm's length, and I walked down the trail and kept talking to the bear. "Good bear, you just stay there. Stay with your mama." As long as I talked, he stood his ground. I don't remember a whole lot of the hike back out that night. I know that by the time I got into the edge of the woods, it was dark. And you know, although a little bit of adrenaline coursed during the incident with the bear, I was never really afraid. Somehow I knew that I was doing mostly the right things. But now I was walking down the trail in the dark, in the woods. I was leaving the unknown of the bear that I was aware of for unknown unknowns. And I was certain that if there were two bears out there, who knows how many more were in the woods that I couldn't see. It was a quick hike out. I drove back to town, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning by the time I got back to my room, but I was glad to be in my room, in my bed. I walked in the door, and I set down my bear spray and set down my teacup on the desk, and I looked up at that certificate on the wall. Most likely to be eaten by a bear. Maybe it was a prophecy, but it'll have to wait for another day. Thanks.